I'm very excited to be joined today by the award-winning social entrepreneur and founder of the Valuable 500, Caroline Casey. Caroline, thank you so much for agreeing to be part of our very first Advocacy to Action session.
It's absolutely fantastic to be with you. And I often think that when I hear how I'm introduced, I think you should just call me a troublemaker. I'm a troublemaker for change. I'm also like award-winning social entrepreneur. No, she's a troublemaker.
I love that. Absolutely. And you've done such extraordinary work putting disability inclusion on the business agenda, but also the global agenda. Your initiative, the Valuable 500, is a campaign to get 500 businesses to include disability inclusion as part of their leadership strategies. And it's been supported by some pretty big names such as Richard Branson, Paul Polman, and so many global brands. I was looking through the list before this session and I was just blown away. So my first question, Caroline, is what motivates you? What gets you up in the morning? Perhaps a strong coffee and a cup of tea.
I think, yes, coffee is very good. And puppies at the moment get you up very early in the morning. But I've been doing disability business inclusion for 20 years now. And, you know, I think the fire in my belly is even stronger today than it was 20 years ago. I think maybe it's what gets me up today more than any other day is because I really think we're at this extraordinary moment in our history and in our time when we could eradicate the extraordinary disability exclusion crisis that exists. I actually think we can. I think there are some moments in our lifetimes that you can be part of, and I believe that. So that's what gets me up now, is because I can feel this momentum. As of this morning, we're at 451 companies. We only have 49 places left. And that's extraordinary. I mean, when we began the Valuable 500, everybody told me that I was just, who did we think we were? You know, how did you ever consider that was possible? And the reason I think that the fire is in the belly is, you know, I have a lived experience of disability, and it was 21 years ago, I finally came out of the disability closet when I was working for Accenture. And I had hidden my disability. I'm registered blind. I have a condition called ocular albinism, and I have a very strange and bizarre story, but I had been hiding it for 11 years because I didn't think the business world would welcome it. And for me, why I do the work I do is I truly want every one of us to be able to belong uniquely as ourselves. You know, I want, you know, that's what makes the world, I guess, the beautiful, intriguing, extraordinary place it is. If every one of us can be uniquely ourselves, but be collectively respectful. And we cannot have that unless disability is equally and meaningfully integrated into business. It's just not possible.
Thank you, Caroline. Gosh, well, that's an inspiring start and so much more motivating to get up in the morning than I imagine than a strong cup of coffee. And 451, that's extraordinary and so exciting. And I know that you've had an incredible journey to get to this point, which includes so many things, even an elephant ride across India. I wonder if you could share perhaps with the eye health sector a little bit about how you got to the Valuable 500.
Well, there's lots of stories. I think if I could give you sort of chapter titles, it would be Johnny Cash, Mowgli from the Jungle Book, a horse, some pretty crazy ideas, and a thing called sustainable grit, and a really good sense of humor, and learning how to dance with failure, I guess. So how the elephant came into the story is because when I came out of the closet in Accenture, you know, I wasn't looking after my eyes. Like, I was hiding my eyes. I was working as if I had perfect vision, which it's so ridiculous now, right? It is so ridiculous. But just to give you some context of that, before we launched the Valuable 500, we did some research, and it said 7% of our CEOs have a lived experience of disability, like I did, but 4 out of 5 of them are hiding it, still to this day. So can you still see the huge problem that exists around disability and accepting it? But when I came out of that closet, I was so confused, like, what was I going to be? How was I going to change and adapt? And the doctor I had seen said, look, take some time off. And it was an extraordinary story, because I always remember when I was leaving his office, he said, you know what, I have a funny feeling about you. I have a feeling you're going to do something very different with your life. Now, I was just looking back at him, and I was really not in a good mood, and I was cursing blue language in my head. But when I left his office, I knew something had to change. And it was that day that I decided that I would fulfill my childhood ambition to become Mowgli from the Jungle Book. And 9 months after leaving that doctor's office, I found myself in southern India, on Kappa Beach in Kerala, at the beginning of a 4.5-month trek, where I become Mowgli from the Jungle Book by learning how to become a mahout, or an elephant handler, and going across southern India 1,000 kilometers. But what brings me into relationship with eye health was, because I'm Irish and Catholic and guilty, I couldn't do it for myself alone, no, certainly not then. And I wanted to really do something positive, particularly around blindness in India. And so I had always been donating to Sightsavers as a kid. And I rang up one of the head fundraisers in Sightsavers and said, I'm going to go across India on an elephant. Can I fundraise for cataract operations? And he was like, his name was Russell Richards. And he just was like, okay, yes, okay. And that's how I began my relationship with Sightsavers, which has been a long-standing relationship for many, many years. And it opened my eyes to, the idea that people are blind and they don't need to be. And you must remember, coming out of the closet like that, I had to come to terms with my own disability. But then with my work with Sightsavers, I was like, how are there people in the world that are needlessly blind when we could fix it? You can't fix my sight, but why can't we not? Why would we ever let somebody go blind, particularly when there's a solution? And so that sort of sparked a whole kind of energy in me, and we raised enough money to pay for 6,000 cataract operations. So I got to see the camps in Shankara Eye Hospital, and yeah, it was incredible. So it kind of opened my eyes, excuse the pun, to not just disability, but to eye health.
Wow. Well, I was always called Mowgli as a child. So
really?
Yes. And my parents used to call me Mowgli. I did look quite like Mowgli actually growing up, so that story definitely resonates with me. But I'll wear that badge with honor now.
Mowgli was fabulous. He's still, and Bagheera is the Black Panther, and Mark Shand, who helped me organize the elephant trip, and his book Travels on My Elephant was the inspiration for it. He unfortunately passed in 2014, but I used to call him my Bagheera, because he was the one to make the trip happen. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. So if we move to the Valuable 500 and your experience there, I mean, I think one of the things that we can really learn from you, Caroline, as a sector is advocating to different change makers. So as you know, we're starting to reframe eye health as a global development issue, which means that we need to persuade, global leaders that eye health is not just important for any national health system, but it's hugely beneficial to education, to work, to the economy. And that means that we're going to have to shift and change the way that we advocate and who we advocate to, not just to governments, to ministries of health. And so I wondered if there are, what experience you can share from advocating to business leaders. Are there lessons learned that we can take from that model?
Well, I think, when I first came, so for me is the scale of the disability inequality crisis, of which eye health is part of. And I didn't understand the scale of which eye health has been overlooked. It's ludicrous to me. I don't even understand why we're making the case for something that we can resolve. We can resolve this. This is one of the health solutions that can be resolved, and it should be integrated across all our health systems and our health solutions. But I do know, for our perspective is with the Valuable 500, the scale of these issues cannot be resolved by governments and foundations and NGOs and charities alone. It just can't. The most powerful force on the planet is business. And business affects the way society behaves. What business values and invests in, society will value and invest in it. And so what we would say is that an inclusive business system and a fair business system will create an inclusive and fair society. So when we've approached CEOs with the Valuable 500, and just let me try and explain how hard it was for me to even consider. What we were trying to do is get 500 of the world's most influential CEOs, and that's the CEOs of Google's and Microsoft and Accenture's and Deloitte and all over the world, okay, to commit to having a conversation, to give their attention and intention to the issue of disability inclusion, to make it a part of their leadership agenda and to speak about it. That might sound really small, but believe me, it wasn't. And it isn't, because the first thing they say, but there's so many competing agendas, and this year we're focusing on that, and don't you understand? And you're going, yes. So the only thing that I can say to anybody in trying to break new ground is we have to accept people where they're at and not blame them and not cancel them and not shame them, you know, because there's a great expression, how's right working out for you? It's not enough for us to be right. Okay, so we've got to find a way to invite them into the space that they feel comfortable to admit they don't know or that they haven't done enough, so that we can help them move forward. The second piece is when we've dealt with CEOs, we take them as human beings, right? Like they are moms and dads and sisters and brothers and all of the other things, is to take, the science is really important, okay? The stats are really important, but it's also the importance of the story in the human being. You've got to approach, when you talk to business, about the duality of this, the business opportunity of it, as well as the human opportunity. And one of the things that I've always been saying is, wouldn't it be amazing if we got all of the CEOs in the world and all the government leaders just to take off their glasses for 24 hours and say, now seriously, because you're me and I'm you. It is actually that simple. If we didn't even have glasses, they wouldn't be the CEO. Couldn't be, because they wouldn't have been able to do their job. So they wouldn't have reached their potential. And so I think there's lots of ways in which we can actually make that human connection. But the third thing, there is no doubt, it is around the business case. It is around productivity. It is around profitability. And look, how many people are in a workforce? We know that 80% of disability is invisible. I am sure there are endless amounts of people who have eye conditions that have not been diagnosed, therefore they're not performing at their very best. When I was in Accenture pretending I had 20/20 vision, I mean, I nearly broke myself in two trying to keep up. Imagine that I'd had the help. How much better would I have been at my job? How much better would I have turned up? And so there is a very large value chain conversation for business leaders, but also I truly believe business leaders are human beings first, and they have families. And I don't think anybody would want anybody to be needlessly blind, because something around sight touches all of us very, very deeply. It's a very emotional thing. So it's bringing the combination of the stats and the stories and the inconceivable idea that people are blind when they don't need to be.
So it's the heart and the head.
It's the heart and the head. And when we look at an eye health and how we could I mean, this is about a distribution model as much as anything else. Well, can I just tell you, who would be the best people in the world to help us hack the solution about how we could do this together? These are some of the greatest minds in the world. Okay, we've got this situation. Here's how we do it. This is what the result looks like. How can we do it together? People love being part of things they can fix. This is fixable. So using those business minds and business systems together, and using that head-to-heart approach, but also the idea that you could leave a legacy. People are humans. They want to make change happen. And
so I guess that brings me to my next question, which is, you know, once you've got your foot in the door and you have that initial commitments from a business leader or any leader, how do you really then translate that into follow-up and implementation? How do you take that initial advocacy into something that is actionable?
Well, I think the most important thing for what we've learned is relationships. I mean, I cannot explain to you. One of the things we're very proud of, and I personally am proud of over the years, I've been doing this for 20 years. I have some of the same partners I've worked with for 20 years. This sounds so silly. It's just learning to say thank you. You know, it is incredibly important that everybody's busy. And by the way, CEOs are no more busy than anybody working even within eye healthcare. We are all working hard and really long hours. So the first thing is to always be grateful. And I honestly mean, just use good manners and good relationships. The second part is never, ever overpromise. I'm a real believer in this. Underpromise and overdeliver, and get them to be part of co-creating what you're going to do with them. Rather than you telling them, it's about helping them be part of what you're going to help them deliver, because that means skin in the game. And that's how I know what the work that we've done. And if we don't do what we say we're going to do, we hold our hands up and say, oh, be accountable. I'm sorry, we couldn't deliver. But it is a really strong integrity and delivering and being human and being somebody they want to work with and spend time with. It's really human-based stuff. But I know with the Valuable 500, as we create solutions for business, they like things to be simple, and they like things to be clear, and they like to have their advice taken.
That's very good advice. And we're fortunate in iHealth that, you know, actually, as you say, the solutions exist. It is simple, and it's a very clear case that we're trying to make. So I think that's really good advice for us to take into the sector. I wanted to move now to sort of forms of advocacy, because much of our advocacy at IAPB certainly has really focused on getting global commitments at some of the major international institutions, and we've focused at the World Health Assembly and at the United Nations General Assembly. And I know that you, for example, launched the Valuable 500 at the World Economic Forum, which is just amazing. And you also managed to get disability inclusion on the agenda of Davos for the first time ever. So what's your experience of using different forums and events for advocacy? What's been most useful, and how do you decide, you know, what's going to have the most impact?
Oh, you know, this is so that we got the main stage of Davos in the World Economic Forum in 2019. And first of all, disability, the idea was on the main stage with 5 of the world's most influential CEOs from Fujitsu and Unilever and Procter & Gamble, Accenture and Bloomberg. You mean, really? I mean, to this day, I still, you know, I mean, talk about hustling. But you know something, I have this, I've learned this thing that some of the rooms that I underestimated, okay? The rooms that you thought, oh my God, like, what am I going in here to? Are the rooms that the greatest thing came from. For me, advocacy, and I'm going to call it hustling, because it's what I feel like I hustle for a living, is I can't even tell you, at the moment, even in COVID, I'm doing anything between 13 to 20 gigs a week. And that can be on a panel. It can be, by the way, this is on Zoom. It can be on a big event with thousands of people. It can be in a room with 3 people. But every single conversation that I have, I imagine it is the most influential person in the world, because advocacy is at every level. It's at the powerful CEO level or the ministers, but do never underestimate joining the dots at ground or grassroots level, dialing up that voice. Because if you look at business for a second, people forget, yes, the Valuable 500 is talking to the 500 CEOs. But remember, those 500 CEOs represent 20 million employees, okay? 20 million employees. They're equally as important to get excited because they ask the question. They encourage the business to listen. Okay, that's 20 million employees. But then let's just think about the value chain. Who supplies these companies? Who cleans these companies? Who do they work with? Supply chains, we're into the billions. So every conversation as an advocate or as a hustler, don't put a hierarchy into them. They're all important. And there is no one way for us to resolve this issue, because eye health affects every single aspect of society in every single way. So every single conversation is of value, and it's about how we add them up. Yes, the visible Davos conversations are brilliant, but there have been rooms where there were 3 people that I underestimated, and that has driven more change than I could ever have imagined.
So always hustling is the answer, basically. Always advocating for change, whoever you might be talking to.
Well, yeah, but then also try not bore people, because you know the way. Like, I mean, I have to sometimes check myself as going, because you know I'm so passionate about it. It's just do kind of work out when your friends tell you where the off switch is. And what I'm learning with advocacy is very first to find out where people are at and what they do and they don't know. And that then gives me space to work out how much time do I have to impassion you about what I do. But the other piece that I'm seeing very much now, and I wonder, is that something you're all experiencing, is if we look at this in a multi-stakeholder way and an intersectional way. I mean, lots of words came out of last year, but you're on mute and intersectional are 2 that will stick in my mind. Is try to see how we're integrating and interconnectedness and integration is happening. And I think the minute that we can help people see how eye health is integrated as part of, and showing them the solution forward, so that their head's not going, oh, and another thing, because actually that's what most people think of, oh, and another thing. So it's ways in which we can integrate and infuse what we're doing and how it's interconnected. I think that really helps shoulders go down in the advocacy.
Thanks, Caroline. And perhaps if I just have my final question to you, which is, you know, if you could distill all the amazing advice that you've given to us over the last sort of 10 minutes or so, what would be your kind of top tips, your advice to the eye health sector on influencing, you know, positive change?
Well, I think I'm going to just say what my heart feels. There are 1 billion people who could see, and there is a solution, and it's possible. And the only thing that gets in the way of any of this is intention and will. And I think anybody who works in this area, you're carrying around something that can change. And I guess for any of us who do this big change work, don't be despondent if it doesn't land once. Don't take the failure personally, because it's so hard not to. But it's about, you're never defined by the last conversation, because you get to have another one and another one again. And I think this time is, how do we get that balance between being unapologetically confident that we have a solution, that this is an extraordinary opportunity, not just for eye health, but for the global potential of our humanity, because this touches all of us. Have confidence in the story that you have. If you don't succeed once, try and try again. And that thing about sustainable grit is make sure that you're resourcing yourself up all the time for when the disappointment comes, because always on the other side of disappointment, and I live this to this day, is that light. And I often will kind of say is when, you know, I can never be more sure of something, that when something has failed, on the other side of the failure has been my greatest success, hence with the valuable 500. So it's just to kind of say, find a way to resource yourself up, whether that's dancing, eating ice cream, doing wine, finding friends, find loads of different doors to go to. The more scared you are, the closer you are to doing something really well and right. And just know that what the work that we're doing, all of us are doing together, it is exciting, and the time is here now, and we just have to use it well and right.
Thank you, Caroline. Well, that has been hugely inspiring, so rich and full, and such wonderful advice to the sector. So thank you so much for being part of our first Advocacy to Action session. And I hope that this will be the first of many, many more conversations that we get to have with you.
Thank you very much, Mowgli.
Thank you.